In this video, we'll talk about the 4 layers in an organisation that are critical for the Chief Financial Officer to understand, and importantly, the distinction between a traditional CFO and the modern CFO role. Let's get straight into it. This is the CFO Hero Project. My name's David. I've been a CFO for 12 years, and for 30 years I've been in finance and accounting, including senior roles in one of the biggest investment banks in the world, in Australia and in New York. Every business of a certain size will have a CFO. But do you know what it takes to be a modern CFO? That's the focus of this channel. The CFO role sits within one of 4 layers we would expect to see within an organisation. Let's start with the first one, the financial controller. In some smaller to medium organisations, this could be the only senior finance person. The financial controller may have other names. It may be a senior finance manager, senior accountant. The second layer is the traditional CFO. The third layer, the modern CFO. And the fourth is the Chief Operating Officer, which, depending on the size of the organisation, can have some overlap between the modern CFO and the COO. Here's 2 key tips for you in your career. It's really important to understand these 4 roles and to know in your career trajectory, where are you aiming to get to? Secondly, it's important to understand that these roles can look different in different organisations. Here's 5 variables that will affect these layers. The first one is the industry that you're operating in. The second one is the organisation size. This is a key one because smaller organisations are not going to have all 4 layers, and larger organisations may have more dedicated, discrete functions within them. The third one is the corporate structure of the organisation. The fourth one is the maturity level. That means a startup organisation is going to have vastly different structures and hierarchies than a corporate structure of an existing business that's been around for a long period of time. And lastly, the organisation type. Now, this can affect whether or not we're talking about a listed company, a private company, a not-for-profit, or a government organisation. So let's dive into the first layer. This is the financial controller. The controller generally has oversight of all the accounting core functions, and this will include, for example, bringing all the transactions through to the general ledger. It may have a small team of finance staff that are split between functions such as accounts receivable, which is about bringing revenue into the business, accounts payable, obviously paying out all creditors and all the payments for the business, and then all the way through to the trial balance preparation, where it's going to feed into the month-end, quarter-end and year-end cycles. So part of that is then preparation of the financial statements and the periodic reporting that eventually is going to go to the board. Another important one is the daily cash flow management. So the controller needs to ensure that the business has access to the funds it needs to for its day-to-day operations. This then flows through to the debt financing arrangements, where the controller will have to have oversight and carry out any of the things that the bank needs as conditions of lending, as well as managing all the payments that are relating to any debts that the organisation has. Month-end financial statements is also another critical one for the controller, because there'll be a whole range of month-end processes, potentially quarter-end and definitely year-end processes that are needed in order to get to the financial statements that are going to be ready for either the CFO to review or for senior management. And let's not forget about the budget. There'll be input that the controller has to the preparation of the budget with the CFO, but also on a monthly basis, the controller will have input into explaining variances and tracking the budget versus actual performance of the business. Tax and compliance is an area where the controller will have a lot of involvement, both in terms of preparing tax statements, preparing compliance, and maybe submitting compliance reports to government bodies, for example. Overall, the controller needs to have a firm grasp on tax and accounting standard treatment so that the information they're preparing is in line with standards and fully compliant. The second layer is that of the traditional CFO. And a lot of this is what some people would think of when they think of the CFO, which still has a heavy finance and accounting basis. So predominantly we're looking at oversight of the monthly financial statements and financial reporting process through to board reporting. The CFO often will have oversight of the payroll function here as well, and that's going to involve everything from payments to staff, employees, contractors, casuals, as well as the calculations behind some specific payroll type of payments. CFO will be accountable for establishing the debt strategy for the business. So this will involve potentially negotiation with the banks, as well as putting forth and getting approval from the board for what type of financing the organisation is going to take out. The CFO is also involved in equity raising. So the equity side of it is important to understand how much does the business need to operate, both for now and into the future, as well as what is that source of funding coming from. And if it's not coming from debt, it's coming from equity. Annual budgets is a really critical part of the CFO's role, and that may involve forward budgets over a 3 and preferably a 5-year period, where the CFO has a firm grasp on where this business is going to. And this is going to involve financial modelling. It's going to involve having a look over that period of time with a set of assumptions that you can put forth and say with some sort of confidence. The CFO is going to be involved in looking at the revenue side of the business and how that's tracking, potentially with the sales team, and looking at trying to establish forecasts and understanding any trends and anything which is perhaps missing the mark. Hi guys, a quick note: for more content and videos like this about the experience as a CFO, subscribe to my channel and like this video. My goal is to help financial professionals aspiring to be a CFO, and for new and existing CFOs wanting to develop their skills and their career opportunities as a modern CFO. Check my website for more details. Now let's get back to the video. Next is capital expenditure planning. And again, the CFO here is really about trying to look forward and trying to understand what does this business need to keep growing potentially and to be sustainable. What's the investments that are needed and what areas of the business that can be prioritized in, how much money is that going to need and where it's going to come from. On a larger scale, this is looking at then new business opportunities. This could be looking at business proposals, and this could be looking perhaps more at the finance specific side of it, but it also could be looking at how mergers and acquisitions may have an impact on the business and overall how that's going to connect back to the long-term goals of the business. And lastly, the auditor relationship. Whilst the controller may have the day-to-day communications with the auditors and looking at queries, the CFO is the one who needs to own the relationship with the auditor to make sure it's a positive relationship that's working in both directions. So this is where the traditional CFO role finishes. The most interesting part of a CFO role is actually beyond these borders. And that's where we want to talk about, because this is where the more demanding areas can be and where it's going to push your skill levels into new areas. The third layer is the modern CFO. Now this is where we start involving a lot of strategy. This takes strategic planning, this takes input into and creation of business plans, and it takes a really deep understanding of the business as a whole. And it needs to be someone who's cross departments, who understands what the industry they're in, the business, and also what the competitors are doing. So that when you're looking at strategy, you can be putting all of those together. You can be assessing the market. You can be looking at a competitor analysis. You can be looking at a threat intelligence to see what's coming that we need to be worried about. How can we defend against that? But also looking at what opportunities are there, how do we identify them, how do we champion them, and how do we then seek potential investment into those areas that are going to help grow the business. A really critical area though these days is IT. And IT often will come under the modern CFO delegations. Typically in a small to medium business that might be the case. In a larger business you might start seeing IT on its own because as a discrete function there's a lot going on with it. But where the modern CFO has oversight and responsibility for IT, these days it's super important. You've got to realize cybersecurity and addressing cyber risk is one of the most important things as a CFO you need to understand. But you also need to understand IT both from a how is it helping your business, but also what are the investments that are going to be needed in that part of the business to help grow and evolve the business, the efficiency, the operations, capabilities, and so on. Another common area, especially in a mid-sized business, is risk management. And I'll throw in governance into that area as well. Risk management is an area where, as a CFO, you have to be across it, not just from the finance aspect of it, but you need to understand risk management as a total package that crosses over all parts of the business, because it's not just where there's a financial impact to that, but often there's an analysis type mindset that's really helpful with risk, that can help identify and assess risk, but assess mitigation strategies and assess controls. So let's move on to project management. Projects are everywhere in organizations, and it's really important to understand projects from a project life cycle perspective, meaning how do you initiate them? How do you sponsor them? How do you determine a suitable investment in them? How do you look at what sort of reporting and control they need? What resourcing do they need? What risks do they have attached to them? How should they be executed? These are all areas where, as a CFO, a modern CFO, you can be thinking about all those areas, but also you can then have some level of control over how you can guide successful projects within your organization. So let's now come back to capital projects. So the CFO typically had the finance part. Capital projects as a modern CFO is about understanding that you've now got to address prioritization of projects within a business. And it's not just looking at the finance side of it, it's looking at how does that project sit in relation to the business achieving its goals, and how do you make an assessment over what's a priority, what's a critical strategic move, and what sort of investments can be justified, and how do you go about ensuring that those things get support up through to the board. The modern CFO will also have other parts of the business, potentially business units reporting into them, that are not finance related. And this is really important because this is where you can start growing your skills and having other parts of the business that you understand at a much more deeper level. Business continuity planning is another area as a CFO you can look at with your skills that will really add value, because this is, again, it touches both into risk management as well as how to keep that business operational in the event of some sort of event or disaster scenario. As a CFO, this is a key area where you should be thinking of how resilient is your business, and understanding what those critical threats are is really important to be able to then have strategies in place. The modern CFO also may have other compliance and regulatory reporting areas that come under their delegation. And this may be where you're in an industry where it's heavily regulated and it's not just about finance reporting and finance compliance, but broader things that are having to be reported back to the government bodies. And lastly, human resources is an area that may fit under the modern CFO. Depends a lot on the business here. Maybe in a smaller to medium size, it may. In a larger organization, you may see that have a direct line through into the CEO. Now let's talk about the fourth layer, the Chief Operating Officer, COO. Some small to medium organizations may not have this role. This is perhaps more for a larger organization. My role, for example, sits somewhere between a modern CFO and a COO role. The types of areas that are going to come under the COO are marketing and communications, product development, customer acquisition, client service, a lot of areas where there's touch points to the customer and customer-facing issues that go along with it. This will also include business development functions, where you may have a sales team, and there may be people around doing things like training or general customer support. Here's also where we may see human resources report into the COO. Now, they're going to cover things not just recruitment, staff management, performance development, but also things around industrial relations type issues. There also can be other areas such as property management and development, legal and procurement, and any other business areas that haven't been captured under another direct report from the CEO. Now let's talk about the advantages of the modern CFO over the traditional CFO. The traditional role stopped at the layer 2. That's still very much finance and accounting based. The modern CFO goes beyond where it's starting to evolve strategy. It's someone who has a far greater knowledge base around the industry they're in, the business they're in, and understanding where they can add value into that whole process. Often the business will see the modern CFO as someone who has a far greater skill base, who has a far deeper understanding of the business in which they operate, is a strategic partner within the business, and is the 2IC to the CEO. And that partnership is massively important. Lastly, they'll have far more greater credibility in front of the board, and they may be seen as someone who has a succession path through to the CEO role. The traditional CFO role has a limitation in bringing only finance and accounting skills. A future-looking board is going to look to see a CFO should be in the space where they can cross the whole business and they can add value in many areas. The modern CFO has opportunities for career growth and skill development, and no 2 days are ever the same. And that's what we're going to focus on in this channel, the modern CFO. So I'll leave you with 3 questions. Where do you want to get to in your finance career? Do you have the skill set needed to be the modern CFO? And if not, what is your plan to get there? That's the critical question. For more great content on the skills needed to be a great CEO, you're going to want to watch my next video, the key skills every CFO needs and how to build them. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.